Tūnei me te papa e takoto nei. Tū mau mai te rā e tūnei i a tama i waho i a tama o kotahi, i te putanga a tama i te rangi tā more more nui, i te putanga a tama i te rangi tū hā, a heke iho mai i a rangi nui e tū iho nei. Whiti whiti nuku, whiti whiti rangi, whiti whiti papa, whiti whiti tau, tū te māhora nui, tū te māhora roa, tū te māhora nui Aotea e tūnei, a tāwhia kia rehua kia tama i waho, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. O tira, tēnā rā koutou katoa, e tika ana kia tuku i ngā whakaaro, kia rangi nui e tū iho nei, kia papatua anu koe takoto nei. Nā tā rāua noho tahitanga ka puta mai ai ko te whaia o ko te ao marama. Ka tahuri atu rā, kia rātou mā ngā tini aitua o te wā, rātou kua karangatia e tahu kumea e tahu kairo, a haere, haere, hana tuatura. O tira, hoki mai rā kia tātou te aitanga tiki, tātou kua rawika mai nei, mā te ipurangi i tēnei o ngā pō, ki te whakawhiti kōrero, ki te ato wānanga i tēnei o ngā kaupapa whakahirahira, o tira tēnei rā te reo o ngaitua huriri, o tira o ngaitahu whānui, e topa atu nei kia koutou katoa, ngā maunga whakahi o te motu, ngā awa tūku taniwha o te motu, nau mai, hara mai, tauti mai rā. Kia ora everyone, and welcome to the second SDG Summit Series Online Hui. You may remember me if you were involved in the first Hui. My name's Corbin Te Aika, and I've got the privilege and the honour of actually being asked to come back and be your MC again for this evening. And so welcome to the second Online Hui of the Aotearoa New Zealand Sustainable Development Goals Summit Series 2020-2021. This Hui builds upon the conversation started in the Online Hui that we had last year, delving into how we can be the change in order to implement the needed changes that become apparent throughout the discussions from our first Hui. In a similar fashion, this Hui includes inspiring panel discussions and engaging workshops. It'll be a chance for participants to learn about and share practical opportunities to take real action towards creating a more sustainable and present future through the SDGs. And so, again, as part of operating on an online environment, I've got a few kind of hints and tips here to ensure you guys participate in a virtual climate, but also that we have a creative and inclusive space for the discussion tonight. And so we'd like you to participate fully in the session, stay engaged, and suggest that you turn on your please do not disturb mode on your phones. Far better than just switching it over to silent or vibrate, but do not disturb will ensure that you can be engaged throughout the duration of the wānanga or hui tonight. It's easy to get distracted by things around you and in your physical space, particularly for those of you that are zooming in from home. I know that some of our panelists tonight have tamariki and things like that, as well as other devices, other whānau members, and tabs on your browser. So please stay muted throughout the hui tonight as well, unless you are asked to be unmuted, and this helps lower any disruptions during the session. And if possible, please keep your video on. I can see a few black screens with names, which is great. I can call you out, but I don't know who you are, and it would be great if you guys can turn on your screens so we can put names to faces, but as well, again, create that kind of creative, inclusive environment for our discussions tonight. Thank you. Well done, Stu Murray, MJ, Colleen Phillip. I saw a few black screens turn into faces, so tēnā koutou. And remember as well that the chat function in Zoom is your friend. If you've got any questions or anything like that, or want to express your thumbs up or support for a comment and things like that, please use the chat functions that are available in Zoom, as well as the interactions. And so using the emojis as well as body language, take from our one of our national languages, sign, to show your support for a particular topic or speaker. And that will be also using breakout rooms tonight as well, particularly for the workshop. So a window will pop up asking you to join another room, and please make sure you click on the invitation. And most of all, have safe and brave and courageous conversations tonight. And just a reminder as well that although we are utilizing technology, the flow may be interrupted at some points, whether that's a technical issue or connectivity issues and things like that. So please, most importantly, have patience tonight. We didn't have too many problems in the first Hui, and hopefully we're not going to have too many tonight. I'm just going to bring up, when I can find it. See, look, we're having technical issues already. I'm going to share my screen so you guys can see. We're going to go through a bit of a run through of the program for this evening. And okay, can I get a thumbs up from everyone if you can see my screen? Fantastic. Loving this participation already. And I'm not even like the important speaker, dude. I'm just the MC guy. The main session tonight is really around a bit of a reflection. This is the overview of where we're at to date. So we had the first Hui focused around seeing the change. Tonight's Hui, the focus is around being the change. And that's building up to the third online Hui that we'll be having in June before the culmination of these online events in the form of a physical event, which is the summit that will be here in Christchurch in September 2021. And so in terms of tonight, there we go. The main session tonight, Aotearoa New Zealand and the SDGs. How are we doing? And so in this session, it's really around having a bit of a reality check around Aotearoa and our performance against the SDGs. And we'll learn how the New Zealand government's policies are supporting the progress, or perhaps not supporting the progress, and what some of the priorities might be for the future. The next session after that is a bit more of a creative part of the wānanga tonight. And we're going to actually hear some poetry from Daisy Lavia Timor. And we'll start the main session in the Zoom link together. And after, the main session there around looking at how we're doing with the SDGs. And after the poetry from Daisy here, you can select a stream, okay? So at that part in the evening, we're breaking out into a panel discussion as well as a workshop, okay? And so this is happening twice tonight, but you can select whether you want to be involved in the panel or the workshop, and a separate Zoom link will pop up for the workshops, but the panels will be in this main Zoom link that you are all in now. And so we'll come back to the Zoom link, this Zoom link, before we end the session, and refer to your program document you would have received prior to this session, where you'll be able to download it and click on the various links to get you into either the panel discussion or the breakout workshops. Okay, and so the first panel that we have tonight is focused around enduring sustainable food production systems. And this is chaired by Dr. Wim de Konen. And so he'll be leading a bit of a discussion and asking some questions of our panelists. And again, just a reminder that you can ask questions using the chat function. And at the same time, the workshop that's being run in parallel to the panel discussion is looking at how we might implement the SDGs in your region. And so this is based on some of the kōrero we heard from Raewyn Jones in the first Hui, and we're very lucky to have her again here tonight facilitating the workshop. Then you'll get the choice again of either participating in another panel, which, oops, I've skipped ahead, which you've got the pleasure of putting up with yours truly, chairing that. And in this second panel, we're looking at Te Tiriti, or the Treaty of Waitangi, and the SDGs. And so if you're familiar with the SDGs, you'll know that number 17 is looking at working around partnerships, forming partnerships in order to bring the SDGs to reality. And so we're going to have a bit of a discussion around how Te Tiriti and working with tangata whenua aligns, or perhaps doesn't align, with the SDGs. And while that's happening, there will be the second workshop, which is around growing sustainability culture in your organization. And so this is being facilitated by Mike here from the Sustainable Business Council. And then finally, we're going to come back together for the final session, looking at the SDG Alliance and the SDG Declaration. And we'll have Ronja and Pedram facilitating that. And before we actually get into the session tonight, just want to do another big mihi to our partners. And so the 2020-2021 Summit Series is co-hosted by Te Whare Wānanga o Waitaha, the University of Canterbury, Te Whare Wānaka o Aoraki, Lincoln University, ARA, Institute of Canterbury, as well as Te Kaunihera o Tautahi, the Christchurch City Council. And it would not be possible for us to be here tonight without the support of Tourism New Zealand, Christchurch New Zealand, New Zealand National Commission for UNESCO, Universities New Zealand, and Humanetics. So just if we can get a bit of a show of appreciation for all of our partners and the co-hosts that have enabled us to meet here tonight. Okay. Juggling multiple screens. Here I was thinking I wasn't going to have any issues tonight, and it's me that's having the issues. So for the main session tonight, like I said, it's around looking at how Aotearoa New Zealand is doing in relation to the SDGs. And so we have a couple of really cool people actually involved in this tonight. We've got Bronwyn Hayward, Professor of Political Science and International Relations at the University of Canterbury and lead author of the IPCC Special 1.5 report. We have Girol Karacaoglu, yes, I think I got that right, hopefully, who's the head of school at the School of Government from Victoria University of Wellington. We have Ronja Ievers as well, Kai Whakahaere Kaupapa at Hui Community Aotearoa and the 2019 chair of the Aotearoa Civil Society report on the SDGs. And so it's going to be a very cool discussion. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our speakers. Tēnā koutou.
Tēnā koe, Corbin. Tēnā koutou katoa, ka mihi mahana, kia koutou. A very warm southern greeting from Te Waiponua to everybody. It's lovely to be invited and great to take part, if slightly daunting being the very first speaker. So as Corbin said, I'm Bronwyn Hayward, and it's my pleasure to kick off for a couple of minutes about talking about how we're going in Aotearoa New Zealand and how on the SDGs and how the world is going is really the bigger conversation that we can't be easily separated from. So back in 2015, when the world signed up to these, which must surely be one of the most successful little infographics around, when we signed the 17 development goals, it was a very different world from what the world we're in now 6 years later. At the time, it was quite a triumphant context, almost euphoric, very strong sense of multilateralism. We also signed, after careful negotiation, the Paris Climate Agreement, the Sendai disaster agreement had followed quickly. It seemed like we were entering a really significant multilateral period, and then many things changed politically and also in the last 18 months with the pandemic. The world has changed so significantly that obviously the effects on some of these measures like the good health, the education access, gender equity have been dramatically affected by COVID. The World Bank estimated last year that an additional 71 million people have been pushed back into extreme poverty. We've wiped out all sorts of gains in unexpected areas, like 20 years worth of gains in reducing child unpaid labour and child labour generally. So what happens next in our recovery from COVID globally and here in New Zealand really matters. How we spend our money and the kinds of infrastructure we build, how we think about supporting communities and businesses in recovery, their urban rebuilds, our water and sanitation policies will all affect our climate, our health, and inequality or promoting equality. And that matters really very much here in Aotearoa New Zealand as well. In my personal opinion, New Zealand has really struggled with the Sustainable Development Goals since we signed the agenda. As Helen Clark pointed out back in 2018, there was New Zealand found nowhere for them to land in legislation or in government. And I noticed that in the first and the second of these global summits, many speakers complained and expressed concern that there was no coordinating minister who has overall responsibility for reporting on our progress, and that remains the situation. We've had a Minister of Statistics, a Minister of Finance, and a Minister of Internal Affairs who by default have had some reporting functions. In 2019, the New Zealand Prime Minister spoke to the UN on our voluntary national report, but we sit uncomfortably with these goals. Some of the challenges are partly endemic to the Sustainable Development Goals themselves. For instance, when the Treaty of Waitangi is our constitutional founding document, it is surprising that the Sustainable Development Goals are largely silent on issues for Indigenous people. Of the 17 goals and the 169 what am I looking for? The word is criteria for assessing achievement. Only 3 relate explicitly to Indigenous people. Goal 2.3 on hunger and food production, Goal 4.5 on access to education, and Goal 5 on security of land for gender equality. So I think a really important conversation comes later tonight, as Corbyn said, to think about how can Partnership Goal 17 be made real, and what does that look like in our constitutional context here in Aotearoa. New Zealand's actions have not been explicitly aligned with many of the indicators, and the indicators themselves are often quite problematic. When you look at them in detail, there's still some. We've been working on a project here in Christchurch where we noted that there are no real indicators for measuring sustainable transport beyond kind of the initial sort of suggestion. There's very few that relate to youth. But even the ones that are there, it's a shame, I think, and a missed opportunity that we haven't explicitly lined our policy agenda with some of these stated initiatives and indicators. Yes, we have the Treasury living standards and the wellbeing budget, which you'll hear more about tonight. Yes, we have the new Statistics New Zealand Ngā Tūtohu Indicators Project. Yes, we have a significant shift in New Zealand aid, around 30% increase between 2018 to 2022 in spending, particularly in the Pacific, and that will be extended with our pandemic virus rollout. Yes, we have some incredibly exciting local government initiatives, but largely taken by local government. You'll hear some themselves, some later today, and we've got some innovative new changes. Our Climate Commission, the infrastructure revision of the 3 waters, and in civil society, the government is still listing, I note, these summits themselves, Hui-E as a community summit, and some of the student activities. But what the global Sustainable Development Goals are telling us is that we really need to be thinking about our progress globally and locally. They apply very much internally to New Zealand, just as they do internationally. And if we are serious about being thoughtful about our COVID recovery, then what comes next, as I pass over now to my wonderful panelists I'm looking forward to hearing from, in terms of how we measure our achievements, really matters. And I hope, if nothing else, the next voluntary national report that the government doesn't simply cluster together existing projects, but does start to try and report some of these against indicators. So I'll happily pass this back now to Corbyn. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe, Bronwyn. Tēnā hoatu o tātou nei ringa. Kia Bronwyn. Thank you, Bronwyn. And now we're going to hand the rākau over to Girol, Head of School for the School of Government at Victoria University. And particularly, he's going to be Oh, I've just lost my notes. There we go. A space looking at the SDG.org.nz, a space aiming to reflect SDG progress in New Zealand through data visualizations, educations, and qualitative information. Nō reira, tēnei te mihi ki a koe te rangatira, kei a koe te wā.
Kia ora, everyone. It's Girol here. Can you see my screen, please? Can somebody put a thumbs up or something like that? Good, thank you. Thank you very much. In the next 5 minutes, I just want to complement a little bit what Bronwyn was saying and show 1 or 2 slides. The fundamental point I wanted to make is that at the present moment, the SDGs are an orphan in the national public policy landscape in New Zealand. And maybe locally there's a bit of movement, and we'll hear about that a bit later, but at a national level, SDGs are at present an orphan from a public policy perspective. We have ticked the box in terms of the VNR and have just moved on. There is no focus on SDGs per se at a public policy level. The reason is that the current focus on well-being and living standards are incorrectly, in my judgment, being perceived as competing with the well-being framework. Therefore, given our current focus on well-being policy, SDGs are seen as a distraction. This is despite the fact, and some slides I wanted to show is, 1 second. Despite the fact that the OECD has actually mapped its various indicators against the Sustainable Development Goals, trying to make the point that SDGs and the Better Life Index, which is the foundation for our well-being indicators, are not competing but complementary. And the SDGs are a global currency, and therefore there is no competition here. Another challenge that we face is the noise coming from some quarters that New Zealand should have its own policy framework. Why would we be a slave to an international agenda? In fact, progressing the SDG agenda is an international agenda, and it provides us with a humongous lever to put pressure on domestic public policy. It also provides potentially a platform for collaborative public policy work across the public sector. However, as Bronwyn said, there is no agency right now that is looking at the wider system. These various indicators and goals are extremely interdependent, environmental, social, economic, and unless we have a coordinating agency, there will be no collaboration, and everybody will pursue their little corner, and that defeats the whole purpose. The other point I wanted to make is that there's a whole range of other frameworks emerging from all around the place, so we are cutting the branch on which we are sitting. The burden is to recognize the interdependencies of these various indicators, to create structures, ministries, or governance structures that see the interaction, and maybe most critically is to see the local communities as partners in this, because this is not going to be driven from Wellington. There will be a huge demand and need for making sure that in fact there is an interaction, trust, and coordination, cooperation between the center and the various communities and individual indicators. Finally, I just wanted to make the point that although everyone is very passionate about their own SDG, the reality is if you want to make progress, given limited budget, we need to make sure that we find the investments which will have multiple effects. So one of the, again, missing points which the university community can fill in is building models that show the interdependencies of this. In other words, if, for example, we eradicate poverty, it's good for equity, it's good for the environment, it's good for the economy, that kind of thing. that will guide public policymakers to decide infrastructure commission and all that, where to invest the money. In terms of the finally pressures on the current measures and what's happening, I can just say that if you look at the major indicators right now, and you think of all these in terms of the natural environment, social environment, economic environment, and political environment, the major pressures right now are coming from two directions. One is natural capital. It's going south in a big way. Those numbers, red 3 means it's one of the worst areas of performance for New Zealand relative to other rich countries. And a downward arrow shows that it's going down the drain. So one of the biggest worries is the pressure on the natural environment. And the other in the social area, which is hidden in this diagram, is pressures on especially housing and the increasing inequity and poverty. So if you want to summarize in that term, those are the big pressures that we are under, whether you look at it through the Sustainable Development Goal lens or the SDGs or the well-being framework or whatever else you want to talk about. Thank you.
Tēnā koe, Girol. O tira, I think you have raised some very interesting points there, particularly the one that's close to my heart is around working with local communities. And I was thinking of some of the mahi Bronwyn's been doing in our place and space down here in Ōtautahi Christchurch. So just, yeah, some good connects there. Finally, we're going to jump over to Ronja Ievers of Hui Community Aotearoa, who is going to revisit the People's Report of 2019 to provide an update on progress made against the 39 recommendations for improvement. So tēnei te mihi kia koe, Ronja, kei a koe te wā.
Kia ora I te whānau. Nā mihi nui ki a koutou, ki o mihi Corbyn, ki o kōrero, kei aku nei, kei aku rahi, kei aku rangataha maha. Tēnā koutou katoa. So ko Ronja Ievers of Hui, he kai whakahaere kaupapa ki Hui Community Aotearoa. Kia ora and hi from Te Whanganui Tara in Wellington. So yeah, I was asked to provide an update on progress made against the recommendations in the civil society report that we published in late 2019. So I just want to have a look back at the People's Report, what it is. So the report is an alternate report on progress covering 17 goal-specific reports. We had one extra report on youth that was written by more than 20 New Zealanders from different organizations, and we also ran a survey of nearly 200 organizations. So it really provided a range of perspectives, a benchmark and a call to action. And it demonstrated quite specifically that NGOs and others in civil society are driving action and advocacy in all areas encompassed by the SDGs, and while not necessarily explicitly linked to the SDGs. But also there's still persistent inequality, and we're dealing with a major loss of New Zealand biodiversity and marine life and pollution of freshwater resources, something that Girol mentioned as well. And the poorer outcomes for Māori, demonstrating the effects of many years of neglect and post-colonial racism. It also demonstrated inconsistent engagement between government and civil society and a real lack of collaborative planning and sustainable funding and resourcing. So together we came up with 39 recommendations across 3 broad areas. And Hui-E has been continuing to gather research and perspectives from civil society on progress or lack of thereof over the last year. And then I invite you to head over to our website at some point where we will publish a detailed report on those recommendations and the progress. But I just really want to give you some really high-level observations. So what have we seen? So it's been mentioned, and will probably come up a lot of times again tonight, is that COVID has delayed and impacted on many initiatives to reduce inequality, and has in fact contributed to increases in inequality in relation to income, housing, jobs, and so on. And while we've seen some steps being taken which are integral to delivering the SDGs and other commitments as well, these are not specifically linked to the SDGs and draw on their interconnectedness and operate in silos. And one very classic example is the work that's been going on for years on the government's commitment to better community engagement through its Open Government Partnership Plan, and how that is completely, it is operating in silos many times. But we've also seen an incredible response from the community sector. Over the past year, community groups and organizations have made sure our communities are connected, they're fed, housed, get well, they stay well, and answer the call to unite and be kind. So they've really harnessed their collective generosity, rallied, moved with agility. And we saw an increased and more flexible partnership within the sector and with funders, but significant gaps remain in the available and funding resourcing for organizations to deliver on their core services. We've also seen an increase in government funding available to support specifically marginalized groups, but we know that many of those groups aren't in fact able to access that funding, and often that's because they are very busy, small community groups in their local communities. They just don't have the capacity or the capability to apply for funding in the first place. So what we haven't seen is a coherent and integrated strategy to support those most disadvantaged. And we haven't seen a significant reduction in structural disadvantages faced by Māori, Pacific and ethnic communities and people with disabilities. And we haven't seen much leadership for the SDGs at a national level. So we haven't got a minister for SDGs or departmental responsibility, although we don't know whether that might change at some point with a report being released in May from the Office of the Auditor General. But while we've seen some organizations, businesses and regions who we hear from later tonight have adopted the SDGs, there's no joined up approach or national coherence. So what do we want to see? We've all taken learnings from COVID, and I think each sector has their own learnings. As a nation, we have learnings. So can we make sure that we learn from those lessons? We all know that we can't afford going back to standard practices and business as usual, and the SDGs and the transformative elements of the SDG, of the 2030 agenda, give us a plan to do just that. We want to see more meaningful participation and collaboration, especially with Māori and wider civil society, in achieving a more fairer and more sustainable Aotearoa. This also means that a well-resourced, connected and valued community sector so that they can really get on with their mahi. And that's work that Hui-E has been leading over the last few months, and really invite people to jump on that waka. We want to see a national and coherent framework or plan that's formally linked with the SDGs and a focus on leaving no one behind. And again, what Girol was saying earlier, it's not an either or, it can be an and. Also, currently, the SDG work at a national level isn't resourced, which is really why there's only been piecemeal progress at a national level. So we think that an SDG alliance could put some structure to it. And I will have more time later to talk about this idea of an SDG alliance and its kaupapa. But essentially, it would be a platform to build bridges, bring visibility, build momentum, and influence policy changes through an integrated lens. So kia ora, over to you. Okay, a koe, Corbin.
Tēnā koe, Ronja. If we can show our appreciation again for Ronja. And highlighting some things that we actually discussed in our first Hui from memory, I think, but seeing a couple of key themes emerging tonight. One, Wellington isn't going to drive this for us. No surprise there, really. But also that you know, we've got a number of issues, particularly for Māori, Pacific, and other minority groups. And COVID in particular has highlighted, I think, the need for us to adapt and change very quickly, and we can do it to go into lockdown. And I actually heard one of our ministers of government this morning talk about how, from her perspective at least, it was during going into COVID and the lockdown was one of the first times she's seen a government actually engage with distinct community groups and work collaboratively, which is funny because we can do it on a national sense, but for some of the other everyday issues that we're facing, and obviously the SDGs as well, that seems to be a completely different story. We've got approximately 2 minutes for questions, and I think, oh, look at that, perfect timing. We've got a question here from Tony Grace for the panelists. Do you also think that low public awareness about the UN SDGs is contributing to the lack of political action? i.e., if the average New Zealander isn't talking, asking about the SDGs, then politicians have little incentive to focus on them or frame policies around them. Has any research been done on to measure New Zealand public awareness? And what are some of the great initiatives you're aware of that have been really successful in raising awareness and advocacy? And we've got about a minute. So if Bronwyn, Girol, or Ronja, if you've got an answer to that,
well, I would just hop in and say very quickly, the school strikes completely changed the conversation of climate. They changed it from a technocratic, very carbon focused to a moral debate about what we owe individuals. I know Girol's written a beautiful book about love, so that might be the cue in there. Do you want to talk about, one of the things is people have got no bandwidth, ministers and the public. So we have to do the work to show how these indicators are already there and how we can measure them. And I think this is where universities can step up. We can't just keep saying it's bad that no one else is doing it. We're the people with the time. And Girol, do you want to talk about your love, your work on love?
Very quickly, I should say that there is very little awareness of SDGs around the broader community. The best thing that has happened for the SDG framework is for the young kids walking on the streets of Wellington and revolting, and that's the only way Wellington will change. They are too comfortable to do anything by themselves, so that kind of thing will do it. It has to come from the communities. It will not happen in the center. And one of the initiatives we're pursuing is to take the rsdg.org.nz to the schools of New Zealand and trying to engage with students, young students, to see whether that's a way. And everybody can do that. We can all do that. I think the young people are the hope.
Ka pai, tēnā kōrua. It's funny, it's made me think of a saying or a whakatauki that we have in te reo, ko ngā rangatahi o nāianei, ko ngā rangatira moa pōpō. The youth of today are the leaders of tomorrow. And I think it's fascinating that it's taken youth to bring these sorts of issues to the forefront of thinking, not only for society, but for our leadership as well. So, tēnā koutou, I tō tātou nei pai kōrero. Just another show of appreciation for our panelists for opening up tonight.